Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call A Night Like This. So the other day when I was looking to take a bit of a break from the monster characters, I thought it would be fun to draw this, a 80s goth chick. So this was done just by some loose sketching. You could see that I kind of had like a body in there, and then almost immediately it was like, okay, big spiky hair, let's just go that route with it. I've kind of been thinking about doing like a 90s or 80s character again, and then when goth kind of came to mind, I was like, oh, I totally got to do that. So that's what you're looking at here. First stage is the rough sketch, of course. It stays pretty rough, to be honest. We don't really actually take it beyond that. There's some like light sketching and stuff, but really all that does is make it even messier. I shade in like the hair and stuff and the tank top a little bit. But yeah, so we just get to the main vibe of the whole piece like really early, and then try to get to paints as fast as we can. It was like insanely rough, just, yeah, sure, a girl with big spiky hair over here, and now it's like, okay, fill that in real quick. What does the value kind of look like having her with the dark hair and the dark tank top and the pale skin? Okay, move on. So here you can see I've now moved it into actually the same aspect ratio that the monster characters are done in, which is 3000 pixels wide by 3600 pixels tall. And now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move into the actual painting phase. So you can see the sketch phase is a very short part of this. In fact, the time lapse is not that much faster than what the sketch phase actually took, just because it's a very simple idea and layout, and then a more complicated paint job. And we'll get into the paint, and you'll see why it kind of becomes a bit of a pain later. Now I want to take a minute while the flats are getting laid in here, because the flatting process is pretty straightforward. We're just going to put flat colors in for the main chunks of the body. I want to talk about DPI, which is something that I get a lot of questions about, and I actually wrote like a pretty big thing on when I was on this like one rando Procreate Facebook group, but I haven't really explained it much here. So let's talk briefly about DPI. People seem to get this pretty mixed up, and I get why. It can be complicated. I'm going to try and give a high-level explanation of the whole thing. DPI is a conversion method for printing a digital file. It seems simple. You have the dimensions you want for your printed image. Let's say it's just 10 inches by 10 inches to keep the math nice and simple. And at canvas creation, you plug in 10 inches for the width, 10 inches for the height. But then there's this window that says DPI. And you think to yourself, I've heard people say 300 and up is the way to go. So you set it to 300 and you create your canvas. What you've actually done is you've created a 3000 pixel by 3000 pixel digital canvas per the behavior of Procreate, at least. What if you create your canvas in pixels? You make it 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels, and you set the DPI to, let's say, 600. It should be extra big, right? Actually, it's still just 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. In fact, when you're making a canvas in Procreate with pixels as the units, notice that as you change the DPI, the layer count doesn't change, but it does if you're using inches. That's because with inches, it's adjusting the pixel dimensions based on the conversion. DPI is essentially a conversion. Only when you go to print does the DPI come into the conversation. By applying the DPI thinking, it's just telling you that if you want to print it at a DPI of, let's say, 600, it'll be half the physical size, but theoretically sharper. But will it be sharper? Probably not, actually. There are a ton of factors that go into how nice a printed image looks. Honestly, if you go down the rabbit hole of DPI, PPI, LPI, etc., it can get pretty hairy. You also have to consider how far away the viewer will be from your material, the type of printer you have, and a whole lot of other factors. If you're someone who works with print a ton, then you have to go down that rabbit hole on a regular basis. If you're just looking to produce some digital material, you don't, which is awesome. So what's the moral of all of this? The most important value when creating your canvas is your pixel dimensions. If you don't have enough digital information, screens and printers alike won't be able to produce that image large enough with a high enough resolution. And the next time somebody tells you, if you would have made your image 1,000 pixel image with 300 DPI, you'd be better off. Remind them that pixels are pixels, and what you should have done was just make it bigger to begin with in pixels. If you'd like to understand more about this, there's actually a ton of information out there. Some people have really screwed it up, but it's out there. You can find the right people. You'd be surprised at the DPI at which most professionals' work is printed, because again, it's only one factor in a giant pile of parameters. When I work in Procreate, I work at usually 8 inches by 10 inches at 300 DPI. For this piece and for the monster pieces and the Village Corrupted pieces, I work at 10 inches by 12 inches at 300 DPI. Or another way that you could be saying that is I work at 3,000 pixels by 3,600 pixels. 3,600 pixels. It's just the simple math, and that's the way the language works between the two. Now, when I work in Photoshop, where you don't get less layers for the resolution that you're working with, and you're working on a computer and, way more powerful usually, I actually work way bigger. Depending on kind of like what I'm starting at, I may even just start by making a 10,000 pixel by 10,000 pixel canvas and starting to doodle, and then once I kind of find my doodle, I'll crop it down a bit. I would say that if I'm not that exploratory, it's more like I'm just going to create like a portrait image or a landscape image. I'll probably start at like, let's say 6,000 pixels by 4,500 pixels, some random thing like that. Of course, that would be for landscape because I said 6,000 before, so 4,500 by 6,000 if you're talking portrait. And that's just because I have that room to do so. So this piece will print well. It will print at 10 inches wide by 12 inches vertically easily. You could probably stretch that to double and it'll print fine. It's not going to be the most insanely high quality print on the planet. It's not going to be something that I would necessarily send to a place where I'm going to make like a on textured paper, high quality, this is $100 kind of print, but it would print in most situations exactly how I would need it. So now that I've done my little bit on DPI, actually, let me just say one more thing. So for those of you out there who've asked me what the dimensions are for my canvas, let's just say that in general, go above 3,000 pixels. That's not exact science, of course, but let's just say go above 3,000 pixels for your dimensions if you're going for like a square. If you're going for something that's more of a rectangle, you're gonna have to maybe take a hit so that you can get the size up in some dimensions and down in other dimensions. And that's going to get you a pretty healthy number of layers. I think that now with the new iPad and the new update to Procreate, I think on my usual canvas size, I get like 70 layers or something like that, and 60 something with this canvas size. So that's still pretty good. It's not that endless, layer fest that is Photoshop, but then again, you're drawing on something that's like half an inch thick on your lap while you're on the couch or something, or on a train somewhere. So there's some hits you got to take here or there. Now, for the piece itself, we have moved into the form shadow phase. I recently, speaking of shadows, I was recently asked to try and show how I did this one particular look that I recently posted on Instagram. There's some old Photoshop characters that I posted the whole lineup of in like one post, and somebody asked me how I did that look. So I'm gonna actually try to do a design soon where I replicate that look, and then in Procreate, and then I explain how I do it, just to try and vary this up here. What you all see on this channel a lot is this method, especially because it's the comfort zone that I found with Procreate, where I feel like I'm not really having to control all of my layers and just get into this big like layer nightmare and still get results that I like. If you look at my old work, or you go through even this channel, there's a number of different ways that I paint things, and or can paint things depending on the look and feel or the limitations or whatever. So I'm thinking about bringing some of those older techniques back in. They're not older and no longer useful. They're just older and maybe slightly less optimized for Procreate, but they're still valid. And if you like the way they look here in Procreate and I can get them to work in Procreate, you can also apply that to Photoshop and anything else. So we're going to be bringing some of those methods in soon. In fact, the piece that I literally posted right before I started recording this is handled differently than some of this more recent stuff. So we'll try to get to some more diversity in the style of painting that I'm doing, but I still think that this is a very optimized way to paint. So it's a form shadow first. That's what we're painting right now. It's done using a multiply layer on top of all of the flat layers. And then we're going to be moving into additional shadow layers and lighting layers. I've actually opened up my Procreate files numerous times here on the channel where I've walked through them and shown to you how they're kind of put together. I'm not going to do that here. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about it kind of conceptually as to how you should be looking to organize your Procreate file if you're doing a piece like this. Keep in mind, all different pieces require different levels of organization and planning and all that kind of stuff. But this is the simple explanation. You've got, let's say, a folder in the very bottom, and that's your background layer. For this one, because I wanted to try and capture this sort of like gothy music video-y type thing, it's just like some gradients with some noise over it, which is really, really simplistic. But that is together in a folder all the way at the bottom of my stack. Then above that is a folder that is all the individual flats of this character in a folder. So it's like you've got her body skin, then her tank top, then like her face. Her hair is broken up into several layers, which you see me turning on and off while I'm moving through things and changing their opacity. Right there is perfect. You can see the layer that's off is one chunk, the layer that's 50% opacity is one chunk, and then the part that's 100% opacity is another chunk, because that just felt like the right way to break that up. All of these flats exist together in one folder. So to recap, bottom folder, background, next folder, all the flats. Then you have a folder of folders above that, and that is where it contains all of the lighting. What those folders contain is a folder that is sort of lightly grouped into shadows, and then lighting, and then kind of like ambient, let's call it compositional shadows, and then final tweaks and things that I don't want to be interrupted by the shadows. So what the hell does that mean, you ask? So let's go through all of them. You've got a folder that is your form shadow, your direct light shadow, your supporting shadows, and your what I call a rounding shadow. This is all like so far from official terminology, so when you talk to other artists about this, like, please don't make me look like a doofus, but these are all like things that I've just adapted over time in order to try and achieve things that some people probably already have official terminology for, and I'm just really bad with that. So what you've got then is, to define them, form shadow. The form shadow is like an ambient occlusion shadow, but I use it to define more than just the occluded ambient light. Then you have the direct light shadow. That is, where is my key light? How are the shadows being cast amongst the figure, sort of like self-casted, and I'm going to put those in as hard shadows. That'll be the stage that you'll see after this. You can see right now I'm going through and I'm defining all of the little details and topology of the character, and that is all my form shadow. Then the next one will be the hard cast shadows. After that, not necessarily always in time, but let's just say if we're going up the vertical stack, after that you'll have what I call support shadows. These are little shadows here or there that are at a reduced opacity that are used to help do some extra form communication. So for instance, on that nose, I want that soft shadow that's going around the entirety of the end of her nose to under her nose. I want that to be there. I also want the underside of her nose to get a shadow. So I can't put that together on the same shadow. I mean, technically I could, but then I'm having to juggle a lot of things in real time, and what I want to try to do is break these things up into stages. So I'll have a softer shadow, one that's a lowered opacity, on the underside of the nose to support that kind of under dark there. I could use that in other places as well. Maybe I'll use it to round off a shoulder or add some extra shadow to the inner ear or something like that. Then you'll have the rounding shadow, which is a shadow that I use usually with a very soft brush, and I apply that to the darker side of various chunks of geometry across the character. So for instance, on her, I might put it on the, so let's see, our left side of her left arm. This is going to get really confusing. I'll put it on the left side of her torso and chest. I'll put it on the left side of her right arm, so that I'm establishing that the light is coming from the right to the left. And it's really soft and sometimes subtle, sometimes a little bit stronger. It kind of depends. It'll be on like the distant side of her face, that type of thing. And that's just used to emphasize a little bit more where the light's coming from. So those 4 shadow layers, and maybe 1 or 2 extra little things that I need to include in there. Maybe I'll throw in an extra shadow punch for like the nostril or something like that. Those all go in a folder. Then above that is another folder that's going to now have some of the lighting elements. We're going to try and capture brighter elements. It's like just above the midtone. Then also another layer that's going to have maybe some shines or some areas that are a little bit higher in value, a little brighter than some of the others. Maybe that'll be like the apex of her shoulder or some part of her tip of her nose or something like that. And then maybe there'll be a couple of other little key things in there. That's where it gets really variable, because that's where I try to sell materials. I'll throw in some bounce layers. That'll be about the bounce amongst the character. Maybe the skin will bounce onto the shirt, or the metal will get lots of bounce, lots of reflection. I mean, that'll be basically straight up reflection at that point. And so that is what I'm trying to capture in those layers. So in some ways you can say I'm grouping them as there's my shadow layers and then there are my lighting layers. Although there is some flexibility that needs to happen in there in order to just kind of like tackle the problem, I guess. Remember, anytime you see the shadows go like this, where they go back to normal, is because I am bringing layers together. Because in Procreate, when you merge 2 layers that have a layer effect on them, they sort of try to sort out what that overlap would look like. And they change, actually, the value of the core colors. So if I take 2 colors that are overlapping and they're both multiply, and then I merge them together, it creates a new lit color where that overlap had happened. So, right, shadow folder, lighting folder, and then we get into the compositional shadow folder, which is where I do sort of like that vignetting shadow all around her. I'll put like a shadow that creeps in from the edges, which is exactly what's getting created right now. And then I'll do a shadow that is about darkening all of the areas of her and erasing away where I want to be brightest. We'll get to that eventually. By the way, part of what I was talking about with the complication was the jewelry. Getting those ringlets, I mean, there's like a few of them together and then they get duplicated a bunch, but then going in and hand painting them all, the lighting on all of them and everything was kind of a pain. I do a little bit of duplication there to try to get around the lighting, but not a ton. Also, I couldn't find any royalty-free goth music that was really good, which was a bummer, so we very quickly just get back to the old jazz stuff, which is fine. But it would be awesome to just have some like really thick 80s goth music just rolling in the background, but alas, that is hard to come by, it seems. So what we're working on here is the last bit of the hair lighting. I'm sorry, actually it's not the last bit of the hair lighting, it is the beginning of the cast shadow lighting. That's what's happening on that chunk of hair that is reduced in opacity. Again, reduced in opacity so that I can lighten it and see all the details better. A lot of those details will get lost, but if I at least do it mostly right while it's lightened, then when it goes darkened it'll look as good as can be. So that's the plan there. You can see here's that hard cast shadow that I was talking about. This is just with the same color as the other shadow, but now instead of us smudging it and trying to get it exactly where we want it as far as like this softness, we're just embracing the raw color of it and laying it down as a thick shadow. This is the shadow that really sets up the lighting for the piece. When I'm doing the form shadow stuff, it is all just neutral, and then this comes in and it's like, oh, that's where the light's coming from, and it becomes super obvious. I want to speed it up here and just blow through this section. This is all just about laying down those shadows and trying to maintain the lighting and all that stuff. So there's not a lot of technique going in here. It's more about just getting those shadows right. But the thing that I wanted to point out was underneath her nose. Now you can see that shadow made it in there. That's my idea of a form shadow. Not the one that's painted in right there that's cast, but the one that's on the actual underside of her nose, making her nose more defined there. That's the type of supporting shadow that I was talking about before. So now we're going to go into a phase where the background's going to get a bunch of changes. We're going to try and get it to that more neutral gray, just trying to capture the vibe. We're putting in some of the vignetting shadows right there, which I'll fly by really, really quickly, but you get the gist. Or do you? Should I do a demo of that? Maybe I should throw a demo of that at the end of this. I'll throw a demo at the end of this that does that. How's that sound? So here I'm doing that soft shadow, that rounding shadow that I talked about. You can see it on the distant side of the nose and the arm and all of that. Once all of the lighting gets put in there, this all starts to come together and you start getting a better image for what is the total lighting scheme of this piece, but it does get built in stages. Now we're doing the light part of it. You can see in the hair especially, we're getting the shines in there. And we'll be going through it and trying to get all of those little areas where the light is hitting it to try and define the like apex of some of these forms. And then in other cases, we're going to be trying to define the material. We're technically trying to define the material like everywhere. I mean, that's what you're doing, like over and over again, defining the material. But some things, it's about the material a little bit more than the form, I guess. I mean, the reality is they're not separate at all. But anyway, some things you just kind of want to emphasize one more than the other. This light, by the way, is being done with a light blue. We're just putting in a pale blue with a reduced opacity across everything. So with my layers that I was talking about before, so shadows, lighting, and then the compositional shadows. So that's where we're at now, where we did the shadows, we did the compositional shadows, and now we're going in and filling in all of that lighting across, which is like hair shines, metal shines, everything. Now the thing that I mentioned where I said things that I don't want to get interrupted by any of the shadow layers, that's going to be stuff like the eye glints and the like metal glinting that will happen. The hottest point where it's just like almost a pure white. Most of the time it is a pure white, kind of like little glinty bit, and that is usually something that I save for the topmost layers. I want to get them sort of like out of the melange of layers, out of the muckety muck, and get them all the way up so they can be the brightest they possibly can be. That's going to be a really good focal point for us. We're not going to want to litter them literally everywhere. We're going to want to put them in places where we really want people to pay attention. In fact, I'm pretty sure the highest highs that the metal gets in this stay pretty blue. They don't really go very white, and the glints on the eyes are the part that ends up staying the absolute brightest in the entire piece. And we always want the viewer looking at the eyes when we're talking about a character. I mean, to be totally honest, even if a character is like pointing a gun at someone and we want a lot of emphasis on that gun, I still want that character's eye line so I can see who they're looking at, what they're thinking, what's their emotional state, etc., etc. I mean, her emotional state is dead inside, right? Because she's goth, so there's nothing to live for, etc., etc. I kid. I'm very sympathetic to the goth subculture. So don't hate me for that joke. Anyways, she's just really mellow and she just wants to hang out in the cemetery and talk about the latest Cure album, which based on the look of this, it might have even been the first Cure album. I don't know, but you can come up with the backstory on your own time. So we are actually pretty close to the finish line as far as all the building blocks that we need for this character. We're going to make sure that we get some reflections in the eyes, and there's some little noodling that you watching this at 1080p can probably spot all of that stuff. And then we're going to do some just like final little tweaky things. Just kidding. I decided to put a fishnet top on her. In fact, the funny thing is, I intended to do this from the very, very, very beginning, and then I did not include it in my sketch. And I got to this point and I said, oh, I forgot I was going to do that. So I started putting that in at this point. This is just done with a near black, I think it's still the turpentine brush. I didn't want it to be crazy refined because I still wanted it to have a painty vibe. I didn't want it to be like too perfect. I think if I wanted this to be perfect and a little bit cleaner, I would have just switched to something like the hard round and then just gone with that, because that would have given me the precision, and I could have set it to like one thickness, and then that's how it could be, just like a real sort of like netted shirt like that. But I decided to keep it a little messy on purpose to really keep it painterly, keep it part of that painterly vibe. It is completely flat black, and then later I end up adding just a touch of light to it. It is laid over the top of everything. In fact, you can even see with her hair that it's over the top of her hair, and then we eventually use her hair to mask that section out. So I paint all of this in, and then I will actually duplicate it and color. Actually, I won't duplicate it. I'll select it, and then I'll fill it in the same color as my shadow underneath, and then I'll shift that whole thing to warp it and use that as the cast shadow from it, which is what you just saw happen right there. Then I decided to add the lines. They just jumped in here because I actually put it in a separate file and then came back to this file. I'll admit there was some mess with my files just for a little bit. It's not Procreate's fault, it was my fault. And then I was like, oh cool, I'm totally done with this. And I'm like, nope, fuck it, let's put a rim light in here too. Because I felt like even though it captured the look and the rim light was maybe a little bit much, the rim light made it feel more polished. And so once I kind of just really quickly, if you scroll back, you'll see that I very, very quickly put in a rim light, and then I come in here now and I actually render out like a true rim light and try to, sorry, a true rim light. I don't mean like I'm going through calculations. I just mean like I did it real quick to see what it would look like, and now I'm like, okay, now I'll actually put in the work and make it look good. The rim light on her shirt and the rim light on her skin is two different layers so that I can control their opacities. You'll see I'll paint it in here like the other one, and then I'll lower its opacity so that it's a little bit more accurate. The rim light is sitting on top of everything else, so you see that there's, like, I just turned off all those shadows and suddenly the rim light like kind of disappeared a little bit on her skin where she's so pale, and that's because all that darkening makes the rim light on top stand out more. So here, what we'll do eventually is we'll duplicate this rim light, we'll blur it, and we'll set it to an overlay. That's not a trick that I've done much on this channel. It's really cool. When you want your rim light to be neutral white, but you still want it to get a little bit of that glowy coolness underneath it, it's overlay that's going to be your friend. You can see it right there kicking in, which looks pretty nice right there. There's a lot of different reasons why you would use all of the different layer effects and blend modes and stuff, and as I've said many times before, I encourage you to experiment with them. Now, just to make it fun, I did a version of this rim light with the net shirt and without the net shirt so that I could have both whenever I want them. And now here, we've arrived at the final version. I'm super happy with the way this character came out. Recently on Instagram, I posted some wallpapers of various characters because I thought it'd be fun to share so people could like put them on their phone. If you go on Twitter, you can also just download those files, which are pretty cool. Like, just save the images off of Twitter. By the way, here's an 80s music video version of the image, which is pretty fun. But then for wallpaper purposes, I also extended the canvas. Basically, I just extended it and then painted on top. Like I painted on top to extend the hair where it needed to be, enlarge the background so that it would fit. And that was all just done with like sort of more brute force than, you know, trying to sort of like rebuild the file, because since I was extending it in Procreate, I was losing layers. So that was the kind of challenge there. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the extra tricks that I used in this file real quick. Okay, so here's a piece from, I think, at the beginning of the year, maybe the beginning of the year, end of last year. If you've been with the channel for a bit, you may recognize it. I thought it'd be fun to use a different piece than the one that we actually viewed in the demo to talk about just a couple of the little kind of silly tricks that get thrown in towards the end. So first of all, this one has some chromatic aberration on it, and these stripes that are on her bathing suit were added later. You can go back and view this video if you really want to understand everything that's happening here. So first what we need to do is we need to come in here and do some demolition. We're going to delete, actually I think did I put it all in a folder? Oh, perfect. Good job, past me. Let's delete this folder. We don't need it. Let's delete my signature right now. We don't need it either. Let's get down to the simplest things that we need. Okay, here we go. We have the background stuff, which I am going to also simplify that. Is this full? This is full. Awesome. So we can also flatten the background. We don't need any of this junk for the purposes of this demo. We'll keep it there. Actually, no, maybe we won't. What happens if I just go like this? This might be even easier because then we get a little closer. Cool, let's just go with that. We don't need that fancy background right now. I'm going to show you a couple of the tricks in here. I'm going to show you the encroaching vignette. I'm going to show you the just sort of general compositional eye focus, focal point vignette. And then I'm going to show you the bloom that I did at the very end of the piece. And I think that about covers anything that's maybe like kind of a special trick that doesn't involve just talking about painting some more. So first things first, in order to do these tricks that I'm talking about, we need what I used to call a solid. A solid, in my personal terminology, is something that encapsulates this whole figure in just one layer that I can constantly use as a selection. So how are we going to get that? Well, there's actually a couple of ways. We can turn off this background, so we have this transparency here, and then we can go here and we can say copy canvas, boop, and then we create, well, we've already got this new layer here, so perfect, and then we say paste. So now we have this. Well, let me turn this other stuff off. We have one layer that contains everything that's in all the layers as like a copy. This is similar if you use Photoshop to like a Control-Shift-C kind of thing. Now the other way, that we could have done that, let's turn these back on, is I could have also just taken this group and, like, let's say maybe you've got a lot of layers and they're all kind of separate, so you can't easily turn off the ones that you don't want. You can just take this flat and you can say flatten. You can then say copy. My computer just went off because it's not silenced. Okay, there we go. You can say copy. I'll do it again. Copy. Then you can undo. Undo copy, which doesn't actually do anything. Undo copy because I did it twice. And undo again. So undo flatten. So now we get all of our layers back, right? Then we create a new layer and we say paste. Boop. So now we have a paste that it does not contain all of our layers. If we really wanted to, we could merge like all those layers together. But what are we really after here? We're after a solid, just one thing that is the entire silhouette of our character. Now I will select this, and now we can really get to work. This character has some lighting, not a ton of lighting. I mean, she's just not very dramatically lit. She's kind of just brightly lit. But we're going to bring some drama to this. So I've selected her. I'm going to go into these swatches down below that I very rarely change. I believe her shadows are, I mean, they're warm, but they are a little purple. So I'm going to stay in the purple realm. I'm going to use this one right here. So we're a little red, a little purple. And I'm going to create a new layer so that we don't disrupt our solid layer. And I'm going to fill. Now we have a shadow. We can actually, if we want, we can get rid of this layer now, as long as we don't eliminate this shadow. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to select the inverse. How do I do that? I'm going to hold down selection at the top, and it brings this up again, and I'm going to click invert right here, and I'm going to fill. Okay, I'm turning off this solid for a second just so you can see that I filled the whole space in with this like kind of purple. Just so that it's as clear as possible, I'm going to now convert that purple to a multiply, so the background just got a lot darker because this is a cutout. But that's not actually what we're looking for. What we're looking for is an encroaching shadow. So I go to my Gaussian blur and I start to blur it. I'm dragging from left to right to increase the intensity. And you can see on like her skin right here, as I blur it more and less, it encroaches more or less. So let's go to something like that. And let's go back here and select this solid again. Select the inverse of it again and clear. So now what we've done is we've created, as I toggle it on and off, you can see there's this shadow that's encroaching around all the sides evenly, more or less. That's good. We can also duplicate that and make it more dramatic if we want. Let's just leave it alone for now. Maybe we'll come back to that. What do we do with this solid that we had? What happens if we also convert this to multiply? Big surprise, it darkens her. But what if we made a mask just by tapping on it, saying mask, and you see it automatically converts us to black right now, which black means I don't want to see it, white means I do want to see it. So if you go here, it's all white right now, which means I want to see the whole thing. Let's take our soft brush, set to black, and just start erasing away where we want the focus to be. Let's say we want it to be down her main figure, not on her arm going off screen and not on her arm going to the back. But this feels like the eye can look at the face, but then it kind of starts going down her body, and I really want it to be focused more in the upper half. So let's switch this back to white. We're still on our layer mask, and let's try to pull this up just a little bit. There we go. So we've darkened now the bottom. So we've got a little bit more focus now going up to the top. If we turn this off, you can see she's got a big face and big like greenish bluish eyes, so we're going to be looking at that, but this certainly helps reinforce that a little bit more. If we go back to selecting that shadow, we can even make this a little bit more dramatic by bringing the brightness down, maybe bring the saturation down, maybe, I don't know, it's up to you. Let's undo those changes. And then we've also got this. So these two factors right here is what we're using to create some pull back towards the face. We could also duplicate this if we wanted to. Maybe make it a little darker, a little less saturated, and then go back to that mask, and we could block out even more. So now we're really making that fall off a little bit more intense. You can see that as we get to the very ends of her limbs, it gets even darker, but then this one is still there, and then this encroaching one is also still there, softening the entire form of her. Last but not least, I want to talk about the bloom. So hopefully that was all cool and fun for everyone. And I want to talk about the bloom. This one can be done in lots of different ways. I'm going to just show you like super easy version. You go to copy canvas and then paste. And we've just got a duplicate of the entire thing. If I turn it on and off, you can't tell the difference. And then I'm going to blur it with Gaussian blur like that. Let's say that's enough. And then we're just going to switch this to a lighten. And you can see right here we have this nice soft lightening aspect, and we're going to reduce that to wherever we want. We want it like that. We want it, yeah, that's good. I think that lighten gives it a nice soft blur. Lighten is the, well, actually I think screen is the opposite of multiply. Lighten is the opposite of darken. Screen, you'll get a little bit more of an intense version of it. I think lighten's a bit better. And this gets you like a nice soft, like daytime soap opera blur, as opposed to doing something like add, which is going to get you just this crazy like type thing. You could bring that way down and that's gonna, you know, take the edge off, but it's still not giving you like a bloom. Instead, it's giving you just like an intense brightening of everything. So let's go back to lighten and turn that back up, and you can see that bloom. And that's how I did it for the goth, because I'm trying to capture like a very specific look. Depending on the look you're trying to go for, you might want one of those other modes instead. So there you go. That's how I did the vignetting, the focal point shadow, and the bloom. And then here we are again, the final goth. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that too, and I will see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.